Let's start with the lesser-known child murder cases and gradually work our way towards the most horrifying ones on the list. Number 1. Jasmine Richardson. In April 2006, in the small town of Medicine Hat, Alberta, a seemingly ordinary family became the victims of one of the most chilling massacres in Canadian history. The central figure, Jasmine Richardson, was only 12 years old, but she was obsessed with the gothic lifestyle and vampire stories. She met Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man who claimed to be a 300-year-old vampire. Their messages grew increasingly bizarre, filled with bloody vows. Eventually, they made an unthinkable decision: to murder Jasmine's entire family so they could be free to be together forever. On the night of April 23, 2006, Jasmine unlocked the back door, allowing Jeremy to sneak into the house. As her parents slept, her murderous boyfriend stormed into their bedroom, mercilessly stabbing them with a knife. Jasmine's mother screamed in agony, fighting back, but it was all in vain. The room was drenched in blood, and Jasmine just stood there, silently watching. But the most horrifying moment was yet to come. In a small bedroom, her 8-year-old brother, Jacob, woke up, confused about what was happening. He didn't understand. Until Jasmine, his own sister, picked up a knife and ended his life. The next morning, a neighbor's child looked through the window and discovered the gruesome truth. Jasmine's parents and little brother had been brutally murdered, but Jasmine was gone. She was on the run with Jeremy. Just 24 hours later, the police caught the pair in a nearby town. When interrogated, Jasmine showed no fear, no remorse. She simply shrugged and said, "It had to happen." In the end, Jasmine was sentenced to 10 years, the maximum penalty for a minor in Canada, while Jeremy Steinke received a life sentence. A true story, yet it sounds like a nightmare. A 12-year-old girl, not coerced, not manipulated, but willingly choosing to kill her entire family. For a twisted love, for dark thoughts left unchecked. This wasn't just a crime, it was a warning. What happens when lost children become obsessed with dangerous ideas and no one stops them in time? Number 2. Craig Price. A quiet neighborhood in Warwick, Rhode Island, 1989. Craig Price grew up in an ordinary community. No one suspected that a 13-year-old boy was hiding a monster inside him. On the night of July 27, 1987, Craig broke into the home of his 27-year-old neighbor, Rebecca Spencer. She had no quarrel with him. But that night, Craig picked up a knife and stabbed her 58 times. No explanation. No clear motive. The police never suspected that the killer was a child. The case went cold. Until 2 years later, when blood was spilled again. On September 1st, 1989, Craig, now 15 years old, decided to strike again. But this time, his victims were not just one person. He sneaked into the home of Joan Heaton, a mother living with her 2 daughters, ages 8 and 10. When Joan spotted the intruder, she screamed, but Craig lunged at her, stabbing her repeatedly. She struggled, trying to escape, but within minutes, everything was soaked in blood. Her 2 little daughters didn't stand a chance. Craig slaughtered them with the same ruthless brutality. When the police discovered the bodies, they were horrified by the sheer violence of the crime. No hesitation, no remorse. Days later, Craig was arrested, but when the police interrogated him, he just laughed. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't sorry. He even described the killings as if he were telling an amusing story. However, since Craig was only 15, U.S. law at the time didn't allow him to be tried as an adult. If the law had been followed, he would have been released at 21, free to live as if nothing had ever happened. But there was a problem. Craig couldn't stop his violent tendencies. In prison, he constantly attacked other inmates, threatened guards, and was even caught plotting murder from behind bars. Eventually, he was sentenced to additional decades in prison for his continued crimes. Today, Craig Price remains incarcerated, and he may never be released. The real question is, if he hadn't been caught early or had been set free, how many more lives would have been lost at his hands? Number 3. Josh Phillips. On November 3rd, 1998, Maddie Clifton, an 8-year-old girl from Jacksonville, Florida, went outside to play and never returned home. Her family panicked. The entire neighborhood searched desperately. But no one knew. She was much closer than they thought. Joshua and Maddie were neighbors. That day they were playing ball near Joshua's house. But then the ball accidentally hit Joshua. Maddie started crying. And that was when everything changed. He panicked. Not because Maddie was hurt, but because he was afraid his father would be angry. In a moment of fear, Joshua attacked her. One hit, then another, and then he realized he had gone too far. Maddie lay there, motionless, and Joshua knew there was no turning back. In sheer desperation, Joshua did something unthinkable. He dragged Maddie's body into his bedroom and hid her under his bed. 6 days passed. While the police searched everywhere, Joshua slept on his bed, with his neighbor's body lying just beneath him. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. And then, one moment changed everything. On November 10th, Joshua's mother walked into his room to clean. Something strange under the bed caught her attention. She bent down to look closer, and then she screamed. The police arrived immediately. Joshua was arrested. He didn't resist. There was no way to deny the truth. In court, Joshua claimed he never meant to kill Maddie, but his actions afterward proved otherwise. There was no mercy for the 14-year-old. Joshua Phillips was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole. Number 4. Alec Kreider. On May 12, 2007, in the town of Mannheim, Pennsylvania. The Haynes family was fast asleep. They had no idea that just outside a shadow was silently approaching. Alec Kreider, a 16-year-old teenager, snuck into the home of his close friend, Kevin Haynes. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to kill. He walked through the living room, up the stairs, and into Kevin's bedroom. No noise, no warning. Just a cold blade. And a sleeping teenager. In the darkness, Alec raised his knife and stabbed Kevin repeatedly. Kevin woke up panicked, but before he could scream, Alec kept attacking. The nightmare wasn't over. He then moved to the bedroom of Kevin's parents, Thomas and Lisa Haynes. They barely had time to react and had no chance to survive. He killed them both on the spot. Blood soaked the house, but Alec wasn't finished. He walked away silently as if nothing had happened. And the scariest part? After murdering 3 people, he went home, changed his clothes, and continued living his life as if nothing had ever happened. The entire town was in shock. Who could slaughter an entire family without leaving a trace? The police investigated, but there was no clear evidence. And then 2 weeks passed in silence. But that silence didn't last long. Alec Kreider broke it himself. One day, Alec confessed everything to his father. He spoke about the murders in a chilling, emotionless tone. Horrified by what his son had done, Alec's father took him to the police. And shortly after, he was arrested. In court, Alec offered no defense. He simply said he hated life. That was it. No motive, no clear reason. He was sentenced to 3 life terms with no possibility of parole. And to this day, he remains in prison, trapped with his own dark thoughts. Sometimes monsters don't come from the shadows. They don't kill for a specific reason. They aren't tormented by their past. They kill simply because they want to. Number 5. Andrew Golden and Mitchell Johnson. March 24th, 1998. A seemingly normal morning at Westside Middle School. Andrew Golden, 11, and Mitchell Johnson, 13, didn't go to class like other students. Instead, they had a plan. The 2 boys slipped away, disappearing into the woods behind the school. But they weren't empty-handed. A small truck filled with weapons was waiting. Rifles, handguns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Everything had been prepared in advance. Their goal? To commit a massacre in broad daylight. Mitchell, unstable and obsessed with revenge and proving his strength. Andrew, a skilled shooter despite his young age, eager to experience the thrill of killing. 11:45 a.m. The fire alarm rang. Hundreds of students and teachers rushed outside, thinking it was just a routine drill. But seconds later, gunfire erupted. From the woods, Andrew and Mitchell opened fire on the crowd. Students screamed, running in terror, but the bullets spared no one. Teachers tried to shield their students only to be gunned down in front of them. 5 people killed, 10 others wounded. The schoolyard descended into chaos. And then the shooting stopped. Not because they felt remorse, but because they ran out of bullets. Police swarmed the scene expecting to confront grown men, only to find 2 young boys with innocent-looking faces. No fear, no regret. Andrew and Mitchell were arrested on the spot, but this is where the case became even more controversial. Under Arkansas law at the time, the 2 boys could not be tried as adults. This meant that, despite murdering 5 people, they could only be held until they turned 21. In 2005, after serving their sentences, both were released, as if nothing had ever happened. 2 teenage killers walked free. But the wounds they inflicted, the lives they stole, could never be restored. The question remains, did Andrew Golden and Mitchell Johnson truly change? Or one day, would the guns be raised again? Number 6. Curtis and Catherine Jones. 12-year-old Curtis and 13-year-old Catherine Jones weren't cold-blooded murderers. But in 1999, they planned the murder of their mother's boyfriend and became the youngest children in U.S. history to be sentenced as adults. Curtis and Catherine didn't grow up in a happy home. They lived with their mother and her boyfriend, a violent, abusive man. He didn't just beat their mother. He tormented and abused the children themselves. No one helped them. No one believed them. They tried to ask for help many times, but their cries went unheard. And then, pushed to the edge, they saw only one way out: kill, to be free. That night, Curtis silently gripped the gun in his hands. Catherine stood beside him, not saying a word. A single gunshot echoed. The man collapsed to the floor. It was over, or at least they thought so. But there was a problem. They didn't know how to cover up a murder. They panicked, and by the next morning, the police were at their door. Both were arrested, but when the police asked why, their answer shocked the entire nation. They killed to save themselves. But the justice system showed no mercy. Despite being only 12 and 13 years old, they were charged as adults. And the sentence was 18 years in prison. 18 years for a crime born out of desperation. In 2015, after nearly 2 decades behind bars, Curtis and Catherine were finally released. But their childhood had been lost forever. And the most painful part? Their mother never stood up to defend them. This isn't a story about children killing for pleasure. It's a story about 2 kids cornered into the darkest part of life, forced to find their own escape. If someone had listened sooner, if someone had intervened, maybe things would have been different. So the real question is, were they truly criminals, or just children with no other choice? Number 7. Willie Bosket. Willie Bosket was no ordinary teenager. He grew up surrounded by violence. His father was a murderer, and fate seemed to have already decided he would follow the same path. But what made this case truly terrifying wasn't his background, it was his motive. He didn't kill out of desperation. He didn't kill because of conflict. He killed simply because he wanted to know what it felt like. On March 19, 1978, Willie carried a handgun onto a New York subway. He looked around and picked a random target. 10 seconds later, a man collapsed, blood pooling on the train floor. Willie walked away without hesitation. But just 2 days later, he did it again. 2 lives taken, just because a teenager wanted to experience what it was like to be a killer. New York was shaken. A teenager, a child, had become a serial murderer. The police caught Willie quickly, but when they asked him why he did it, his answer sent chills down their spines. Willie simply laughed and said, "Because I felt like it." No fear, no remorse. To him, killing was just entertainment. But this was when a horrifying legal loophole was discovered. At the time, New York law stated that no one under 16 could be tried as an adult, no matter how brutal the crime. That meant Willie Bosket, a serial killer, could serve just a few years and then be released. The public was outraged. Protests erupted. And within months, New York had no choice but to change the law. From 1978 onward, any juvenile who committed a serious crime could be tried as an adult. And it all started because of Willie Bosket. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. And to this day, Willie remains locked away in solitary confinement, serving a lifetime sentence, too dangerous to ever be set free. Number 8. Graham Young. Graham Young wasn't like other kids. While boys his age were obsessed with soccer or comic books, he was fascinated by chemistry, specifically poisons. By the age of 14, Graham had memorized every formula for deadly substances like thallium and antimony. But instead of using his knowledge to save lives, he decided to experiment on his own family. His first victim? His stepmother. She suffered from constant stomach pain, vomiting, and gradually became weaker over time. No one knew that every cup of tea she drank was the reason why. But she wasn't the only one. Graham's father, his sister, even his classmates, all began experiencing strange symptoms. Pain, seizures, weakness, but no one suspected anything until it was too late. On April 21st, 1962, Graham's stepmother died. Doctors ruled it a natural death. Graham had committed murder and gotten away with it. But the nightmare wasn't over. His friends and family kept getting sick, and slowly something terrifying became clear. One of Graham's science teachers, noticing his unusual knowledge of poisons, reported him to the police. And when officers searched Graham's room, they were horrified. A journal detailing each poisoning experiment, the exact doses, the victim's reactions, and chilling notes. This dose wasn't strong enough. Needs more. He wasn't just poisoning people, he was documenting their deaths like a scientific study. Graham was arrested and sentenced, but not to a normal prison. Because of his young age, he was sent to a high-security psychiatric hospital for criminally insane offenders. But even behind bars, Graham continued poisoning people. Prisoners and hospital staff mysteriously fell ill. When investigated, authorities discovered that Graham had found ways to obtain poisons even in confinement, just to keep Jaladi experimenting. Unable to control this monster, Graham was sentenced to life in prison. He died behind bars in 1990. Had he not been caught early, the world may have faced a serial killer with a method no one could have anticipated. A dose of poison and a cold, calculating smile. Number 9. Robert Thompson and John Venables. That afternoon, 2-year-old James Bulger went to the shopping center with his mother. But in just one moment of distraction, everything changed forever. Security cameras captured James walking out of a store, holding hands with 2 older boys. Passers-by saw them, but no one suspected anything. Just 2 big brothers taking their little sibling for a walk, right? They weren't his brothers. They were Robert Thompson and John Venables, 2 10-year-olds planning an unthinkable crime. They led James through streets, over bridges, and into deserted alleys. Nearly 2.5 miles, a journey of pure horror. After 2 hours of wandering, they stopped at an abandoned railway. This was where they made their move. James, a defenseless 2-year-old, was about to endure something unimaginable. They threw bricks at his head, beat him with metal bars. As he struggled to breathe, they smeared paint on his body, as if it were just a game. Finally, they placed his body on the train tracks to cover up their crime. The next day, James Bulger's lifeless body was discovered. A scene so horrifying that even the most experienced investigators were left shaken. The security footage told no lies. Police quickly identified Robert and John. When arrested, John Venables broke down in tears. But Robert Thompson remained ice cold, as if nothing had happened. In the end, both were convicted of murder, but because they were so young, they could only be detained until they turned 18, after which they were released under new identities. Yes, 2 child murderers were set free, as if nothing had ever happened. But the story didn't end there. Despite undergoing rehabilitation, John Venables was later arrested for possessing child abuse material. As for Robert Thompson, no one knows where he is. James Bulger never got the chance to grow up, but his killers were given a second chance at life. So the question remains, can a child who commits such a crime truly be rehabilitated? Or is evil something that runs too deep to change? Number 10. Mary Bell. Mary Bell did not have a happy childhood. She grew up in a violent home, suffered abuse at the hands of her own mother, and witnessed horrific things from an early age. But instead of becoming a victim, Mary chose to become a predator. On May 25, 1968, just one day before her 11th birthday, Mary lured a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown into an abandoned house. No one knew what happened inside until Martin's body was found. The boy lay on the floor with no visible injuries, But when forensic experts examined him closely, they found faint strangulation marks on his skin. Could a child kill with their bare hands? Police had no suspects, but Mary couldn't contain her excitement. She bragged to her friends about Martin's death. No one believed her. No one suspected that it wasn't a joke. And then she struck again. On July 31st, just 2 months after her first kill, Mary and her friend Norma Bell, no relation, targeted another victim, 3-year-old Brian Howe. They led Brian to a secluded area, and this time, Mary didn't just strangle him. She wanted to leave her mark. When police found Brian's body, there were cuts on his stomach. A crude letter M was scratched into his skin. But that wasn't the scariest part. Mary returned to the crime scene to admire her work, and when asked about the case, the 10-year-old girl described Brian's injuries. Before the police had even released that information, only a killer could have known those details. Eventually, Mary was arrested, but the most shocking part was her reaction. No tears, no fear. When she heard the verdict, Mary simply smiled. In 1968, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and by the age of 23, she was released with a brand new identity. Today, Mary Bell still walks free, protected by the government, while the families of her victims can never escape their grief. A child who killed, not for money, not for revenge, but simply because she wanted to know what it felt like. And the biggest question remains, are monsters born, or does society create them? Thank you for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts on these cases.